Okay, Maurice?
Johnny, hey, my old friend. How are you?
Good to see you, Maurice. Been a long time, huh?
How long have you been out?
Oh, not very long.
It was very difficult, no?
Yeah. Very difficult.
You have my sympathy, Johnny. You have not yet learned that in this life you have to be like everyone else. The perfect mediocrity. No better, no worse. Individuality is a monster, and it must be strangled in its cradle to make our friends feel comfortable. You know, I often thought that the gangster and the artist are the same in the eyes of the masses. They are admired and hero worshipped, but there is always present underlying wish to see them destroyed at the peak of their glory.
Yeah, like the man said. Life is like a glass of tea, huh?
Oh, Johnny, my friend. You never were very bright, but I love you anyway.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the DanaBuckler Show. My name is Dana, and I'm pleased to welcome back on the podcast my friend David Klein. David, how are you today, my friend?
I'm great. So excited to talk about this movie that I love to deep in my bones.
I am excited to have this conversation because this is a film that I'm aware of, and I do recall watching it some 30 years ago, but not understanding sort of the gravity of the film. And when you suggested it as a film that we sort of dissect on the podcast, I was really excited to do this. So, like the title of this episode says, we're talking about the 1956 film, The Killing, directed by Stanley Kubrick. And before we go any further, we are going to get into detailed plot spoilers of this film. And we want you, the listeners out there, to have a full understanding of what we're talking about. We're encouraging you to watch this movie. Now, David and I were just talking before we started recording. I rented the film and then discovered that it was available on YouTube for free. And then, David, you mentioned which avenue did you watch the film?
The Internet Archive.
Okay, perfect. And that was also free, and it was the Criterion.
Archive.org.
Yeah, perfect. So we want to definitely, give a big spoiler warning for The Killing. So, having said that, David, I'm going to start by asking you this question because you are the one that recommended this film. So please tell me, why does this movie matter to you?
I think it hits everything that I could personally want in a movie. It's an ensemble piece. I love an ensemble piece to see people working together. The dialogue is absolutely amazing. The plot is intricate, like a jigsaw puzzle. And Kubrick directs that jigsaw puzzle sort of, it's like a Fabergé egg. It's perfectly constructed, elegant black and white cinematography. And I love a movie where everybody's a little seedy and down on their luck, a little desperate, with that little air of menace. And a heist movie, it's just, the jigsaw puzzle where every person, every character plays has, as Johnny Clay, the protagonist says, has definite duties. And it wasn't restricted just to the Great Escape in a certain way is the same kind of thing where everyone plays a role and there's something just delightful. It's like going to the circus, watching that unfold. But the sum total to me is the ensemble playing. Kubrick chose these guys like Steely Dan choosing session players. Every guy came in and hit their marks, played their role to perfection. A few women too, but mostly men. And he put it together with just such amazing precision and audacity. And it's also I have a buddy who calls certain movies hangout movies, where you just want to hang out and be in the company of these people. He'll say like, American Graffiti or, Goodfellas. And I'd like to hang out with these desperate folks. They're just so fun to be with, to just be in their desperate straits with them. It throws you right in there. It's just fascinating.
Absolutely. So this was a second time viewing for me. I had seen it probably 30 plus years ago. And I can't even recall what it was. Bottom line is, I felt like I was watching it for the first time. I mean, I knew the ending. I knew sort of what happens at the very end. And again, we can get into spoilers. I knew the money ended up on the runway and I knew all that happened. But what I didn't realize until watching it through what I'll call adult eyes is the nuanced complexity of the film. And, doing a little research, it was described as a chess game, and every piece had its part and everybody had their role. And it was just such a fascinating film. And okay, let me just say this. If you're on the fence about watching the film because you're like, God, Kubrick movies, they're so long. This movie is 1 hour and 23 minutes. And I was just like, oh my goodness. I was able to watch it twice in one sitting, just once to take it all in, and then another time just to sort of take some notes on it. And just fantastic performances, way ahead of its time. And you said it best, like this movie, there are so many filmmakers out there that I'm going to use the term borrowed or perhaps did an homage, but this film is riddled with what we now consider cliched, heist moments, but to realize this is kind of the first film to do it. I always try to transport myself back to the time when a film came out and try to disregard everything I know about movies and just say, what would this have been like to see in 1956? And, as we'll talk about, the film didn't do well financially. It was a movie that, found its legs through strong word of mouth. And of course, you have to remember that, 50s, 60s, 70s movies would be constantly re-released back into theaters because there was no home video. So the film found its audience. And again, for only being Kubrick's third film, he's still finding his way, and you can kind of see the semblance of where he's going to go.
I think he called it his first mature movie.
Okay, yeah.
He did Killer's Kiss before that, but I think you can really feel his imprint. I think he obviously, this is his noir. He did every type of genre movie you could imagine: war, historical drama, satire, horror, the works. And somehow this was his noir, but he drew on all that had gone on. I mean, obviously this era was going to unfold. It was 56, wasn't going to go on forever. He seemed to have put it really, okay, in 1956, there was 55, there was a movie called, there was a movie with Sterling Hayden that had, a couple of these cast members in it that was it was kind of similar. It had a voiceover, as does The Killing. And you've got a couple of people, including a couple of cast members in that same movie, but it felt formulaic. It was like bombastic trailer. This is the most realistic thing you'll ever see. Of the crime world, the desperate, underbelly of society. And then he does this movie, and it's like, it's elegant. It has a modern feel to it. It takes the noir to a place that it really wasn't a year ago. I mean, where you had the same people in his cast playing those same kind of roles, and it was a new animal. It was modern. It was sleek. The look was much more visceral. It was much more, you had a lot of the noir earmarks, but so much more naturalistic situations, the depth of the relations between the characters. He really took the time to evoke so much more than was usually seen in a noir film.
You understood effectively the stakes for each of the characters. It wasn't just about the money; it was why they needed the money. And I think we're going to jump ahead a little bit. I don't want to jump ahead because we're going to get into kind of a basic plot of the film. But before we do this is a Stanley Kubrick film, and I have said on numerous episodes of this podcast that one of the more unique things about Kubrick, besides his very eclectic filmmaking style, which is amazing, is no two Stanley Kubrick films are the same. They're all, like you said perfectly, they're all genre pictures, but they're his take on every genre. And I just want to kind of go through the list real quick. I'm just going to go through them all real quick, and then I just want you to highlight one or two besides The Killing that are real standouts for you. So 52 is Fear and Desire, 55, like you said, Killer's Kiss, 56, The Killing, 57, Paths of Glory. I just want to point this out real quick. That's, bang, 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 bang. That's, multiple movies rather quickly, which is something that will start to dissipate in his career as things go on. 1960, Spartacus. 1962, Lolita. 64, Dr. Strangelove. 68, 2001, A Space Odyssey. 71, A Clockwork Orange, 1975, Barry Lyndon, 1980, The Shining, 1987, Full Metal Jacket. And sadly, he passes away during the post-production of 1999's Eyes Wide Shut. So, David, it's incredible that we're looking at a career that spans almost 50 years. We're not looking at a lot of films besides The Killing, which I think would probably top your list. What other Kubrick films really stand out to you?
I'm a big fan of Lolita. Peter Sellers' performance was something that, for some reason, I took it upon myself to learn by heart. Such a strange characterization. Just, I don't know what it was about it. The music, the Nelson Riddle score is kind of amazing. Scenes of black and white photography of the USA. 62, the year I was born. I'm a little nostalgic about that. And one of the things I was interested in, I wrote to you about, is how he somehow managed to thwart the censors.
Yeah.
Through incredibly, witty dialogue that you only realize was suggestive after you've thought about it a few times. I found that fascinating movie. And of course, Clockwork Orange was the movie that we were not supposed to see. It came out when I was about 15, and I remember a friend of mine saw it and convinced his father to take him to see a double bill, Deliverance, followed by Clockwork Orange. His father probably barely got out of there alive. And I remember my dad coming home and telling me about it, because my dad would always sort of tell me if something really disturbing caught his eye. And so, of course, we were super curious about that. And one thing that's interesting to me is Kubrick makes really good use of the voice, the narrator, the voiceover, the narrator, which is sort of the first thing you get in The Killing. Starts with this rather stentorian voice saying, at 3:45 in the afternoon on that day, and it kind of sucks you in. Well, he used a narrator as well in Paths of Glory.
Yeah. And,
of course, Alex DeLarge in Clockwork Orange talk about narration. So it was interesting how he kind of used that throughout his career.
Okay. So for me, The Shining is one that I've always, it's something I watch at least once a year. Understanding, of course, that it's Kubrick's version of The Shining, and Stephen King's not a fan of the film. Understanding that. I'm a big Jack fan, always have. My girlfriend had never seen One Flew the Cuckoo's Nest, and so we watched that the other day, and it's just understanding that he's
still blowing your mind, right?
It was absolutely. She was just couldn't believe it. It was amazing.
Again, an ensemble piece.
The essential ensemble piece of that decade. Boy, that was good. So here's the thing. Not to go off on a sidebar. Jaws is my all-time favorite movie. Always has been. I've got a big poster here in my podcast studio. Jaws was released in 1975, was nominated for Best Picture. But if it was going to lose to anyone, understandably, I will allow it to lose to One Flew the Cuckoo's Nest. So I'm fine with that. Full Metal Jacket has always been a standout for me. And it's not, everybody looks at that as a tale of two separate movies. First half is boot camp. Second half is our protagonists, I say that plurally, in Vietnam. It's going to sound crazy, but I am more a fan of the second half than I am the first half of that movie.
That's bold talk, but I will say that I have definitely come to reconcile those two. That is exactly how it hit me at first. I remember seeing it in the theater. I remember where I was. I was like working at some summer camp in Vermont, and I eventually caught pneumonia. But I remember it was before that, thank goodness. And I remember we had like a night out, and I was like, my God, the new Kubrick's playing, right? So I had a connection that I thought was sort of just an off-the-wall connection to make, just because I was watching that first scene, which we'll talk about. In The Killing, one of the key components, when we first meet the cashier, the henpecked husband, George Petey, and his wife, Sherry, George played by Alicia Cook, who always plays a sad sack. There's the first scene when you first meet them, she's so merciless. Absolutely merciless to him. I felt like she was like Lee Ermey in a hazing private pile.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
it was the verbal destruction of a human being. I was like, wow, it's like Kubrick just had these motifs, I guess, almost. I don't know. It really struck me as similar. First thing you meet this character, she's destroying him.
Yeah. Yeah. And he thinks the money is what it's going to be, because she's sort of, you're pathetic, and, I can't, I want the finer things in life. And she's really browbeating him. I haven't seen did you ever watch the Fargo television series?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay.
No.
So just, again, little side note, I think the first season is really, really, really good. And I know it's blasphemy to try to say that they make a TV version of Fargo, but I'll argue that first season is really good. I've
heard good things.
Oh yeah, and the first episode, our protagonist is dealing with a wife very similarly, in a very similar situation. Right. So that's what it's sort of my modern day take on that was. This is very similar to Fargo, and again, I feel like everyone is, I'm going to say this politely, borrowing from The Killing, because it's such a blueprint. Let's, we're talking a little bit about it. Let's kind of go over the sort of the narrative of the film. So it's like you said, it is a heist movie. It's about robbing a racetrack. It's an ensemble piece, and each one of our characters has separate motivations for the money. But the ringleader, of course, is Sterling Hayden, and he plays Johnny Clay. And in my research, I watched like a 3.5-minute interview with Sterling where he was asked about, what was it like working with Kubrick on The Killing. And he talked about how his agent presented, said, I've got this script. There's this, quote, weirdo from New York who's written a script, and everyone says that he's the next big thing. And Sterling Hayden's agent says, you don't want to do this. They tell the same story 5 times in a row, and you don't want to do this. And Sterling Hayden basically, when he said he read the script, he didn't get it, but he wanted to work with Kubrick. And, obviously it's not the only time they would work together. And he said he had a great time on the movie. He said he had a great time with Elijah Cook, with everybody. So let's talk a little bit about Sterling Hayden, where his career and, his performance in this film.
It's interesting to me that he didn't get it, because he's a very, very literary guy. I went down a complete rabbit hole, again, on archive.org. He was in the OSS before, during the war. He liaised with Yugoslavian guerrilla forces. He was an absolute man on the ground, risking his life, doing crazy shit. And he wrote, I looked at his file. You can actually find the man's file. He writes like a dream. He's really, this man knew how to express himself. He ended up writing 2 books, including one that chronicled what happened later on after this, where he had a horrible divorce and then defied a court order and sailed to Tahiti with his kids, defying a court order. He was absolutely one of those one-of-a-kind people. And that's what's amazing about this movie. Every one of these a good half the characters here were actually incredible characters unto themselves. Kubrick collected them like baubles. I mean, these people, Sterling Hayden's life is way beyond the screen. Timothy Carey, the assassin, I will talk about him later. Just off the charts strangeness, the people he brought together, the wrestler who starts the fight, we'll get into that too. It's such a magical confluence of personalities that happened to be caught in this 1 hour and 23-minute or 24-minute.
Just reading here.
I didn't really address Sterling Hayden directly. I will just say also that we first see him, really, really great economical scene. He strides across the screen in shirt sleeves with a bottle of beer. And then pretty soon we realize he's just made love with his girlfriend, Faye. We can tell very subtly that they've made love only because he helps her fix her belt. Kubrick knew exactly how to thwart the censors, and it was just suggestive enough. You realize that what happened. She talks about he's just gotten out of jail, and she knows she's not there. She doesn't know anything, but he's got a big plot. And he's so strong, though. His voice, his bearing. He was he's 6'4", and he was out there in World War II bossing around soldiers. This guy was not. It was all authentic. You couldn't fake it. And when he says some of these lines, some of these Jim Thompson lines, like, all of them have a little larceny in them, or like it's strictly a muscle job. It just sounds so incredibly authentic. It's just like you're listening to the past.
I wrote here in my notes, this is a good time to bring this up. When you're talking about the censors, I just briefly for listeners there, we're going to talk a little bit about the production code, the Hays Code, as it's known. Might surprise a lot of people to know that in the teens and the 20s, Hollywood was, the films were a little out of control, especially by those standards back then. And it took a politician, William Hays, to come in and say, you guys have to clean up your act. And they came up with something that was known as the production code, otherwise known as the Hays Code. And it was like pages and pages long of do's and don'ts.
Things you couldn't do.
Exactly. Right. And I'm like, we're talking about, like, in a movie, a man and a woman could not be laying in a bed together unless it was known that they were married. They were a married couple. Then there was no interracial kissing. Like, there was incredible things that were not allowed. It was archaic, but like you said, David, there were filmmakers out there that knew how to skirt around the rules. And then there were other filmmakers like Hitchcock with Psycho in 1960s who just said, Hays Code be damned, I'm going to make the movie I want, and literally has Janet Leigh opening shot in a bra, which the 60s really brought that wall down with movies like Lolita and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And then in 1968, we get the MPAA introduces the rating system as we know it, and Hollywood decides to self-govern itself. But, you mentioned, the very subtle ways in which Kubrick skirted around those issues, and it's really, really interesting. I find it a fascinating thing, and it makes me wonder what other filmmakers out there are doing that.
Well, I was interested. I also see this movie as almost like it's a period piece in a sense. It's 1956. It's the 60s, or whatever that means, were not just technically but spiritually they're still a ways away. And so everyone's wearing a suit jacket, except for Sherry Petey's boyfriend, played by Vince Edwards, later Ben Casey. The guardians of the track, the people who guard the track money, are these sort of pot-bellied 60-year-old white guys. They're not buff at all. It's just a different time. Early on, there's a scene in the cocktail lounge, which is just such a swanky 1950s cocktail lounge with this very articulate loan shark, who's actually played by the brother of Stella Adler, the great acting teacher, Leo Adler, which is interesting also because to me he has this very learned cadence that reminded me of the Meyer Lansky character in Godfather 2, played by I had his name today, Lee Strasberg.
Yeah.
Same sort of kind of character. So there's all these archetypes, and not just their faces and their voices. I just feel like some of those things are just a few years later, people would talk differently, even look differently. It's got that Look magazine look to it. There's this one shot where you've got, three of the co-conspirators just sort of caught in that beautiful black and white light. Just very suggestive of those early, late 50s kind of black and white glossy magazines, which Kubrick, of course, was a photographer for.
Are there any other standout supporting characters? I mean, everybody's excellent in this film, but this is an opportunity to highlight anyone that really stood out to you, in addition, of course, to Sterling Hayden.
Well, you got to love the Peteys.
Yeah.
He would always play the sad sack, Alicia Cook did, and it's so fun. Kubrick totally just has fun with him, making him look like a total schlub. There's one scene he's all goggle-eyed, and part of his collar is just standing up totally straight, all messed up. Later, he's filmed in these terrible, tragic pajamas. He just embodies the loser, but eventually, he has his revenge. I gotta say though, the assassin, Timothy Carey, was this guy that I went down a rabbit hole on. He's the absolutely arresting introduction when there's two outside players. You got these core guys, right? There's 5 core guys in the plot that Johnny's got, but there's 2 outside players, and one of them is the guy who shoots the horse, and that guy is played by Timothy Carey, he's all pompadour. He's got these savage teeth. He spits. He twitches. He's weirdly riveting. He's like, "Who do I gotta kill, pops?" And meanwhile, he's holding this adorable puppy as he's sort of like, he goes, "What, $4,000 to bump off a horse?" And he's got this, he's absolutely riveting in a totally scary way. Kubrick liked him so much, he used him again in Passive Glory in a much bigger role. He was so disruptive in this movie that he got kicked off after his scenes were done.
Really?
There's a scene where he's being led to his execution where he bites the arm of the priest. This was not in the script. The priest actor didn't appreciate it, but he was like that. He was an absolute lunatic. He sabotaged his career in the most profound way, like in the epic way. We should have a whole talk about people who sabotage their careers. He was the Sean Andrews of this movie.
Fair enough. All right, Sean Andrews, a callback to the Dazed and Confused episode, which is out now. Make sure you listen to it.
Seriously, Timothy Carey turned down the role of Luca Brasi, the Godfather, to do a show about a character named Tweet Twig who wants to clothe all the animals in the world and kill his foes with lethal flatulence. No, I'm not kidding. He was he was the sort of the negative Zelig. His face was originally supposed to be behind George Harrison on the cover of Sgt. Pepper. It was in the originals. It was taken out in the final version. He was a weird little icon that people followed. And I put him in the sort of the league of famous people who destroyed their careers, along with, of course, Sean Andrews, along with Alfalfa Switzer of Little Rascals and Jeremy Gelbwax, the first Chris Partridge. But that's another conversation.
About talking about Timothy Carey just for a moment, because I was doing a little deeper dive into him as well. That scene in Paths of Glory when they're being marched to their inevitable fate. The first time I saw that film, and it was only maybe about 10 or 12 years ago, I admit I had some holes in my Kubrick filmography. I just thought it was one of the heaviest sequences I had seen. The emotion, especially him, a lesser movie would have someone very stoic and I'm going to, go out like a man type of thing. And to see sort of his, I won't even say he's not accepting it. He's begging, he's pleading. He doesn't want this. He's bawling his eyes out. It's brutal. It's a brutal.
We want
scene.
him to be the hero.
Yeah.
That we expect that his other colleague is, right?
Yeah.
And we want him to do that. And and Kubrick is like, that's not the way it is. People don't all behave that way. He definitely, that was very, very Kubrick. He was always willing to sort of just do that, to just defy that easy expectation. And he does it sort of so blithely,
The choice that I read this, that the choice that Timothy Carey had to talk without keeping his teeth, shut, was a decision that Timothy made because his character, he knew he was already dead, and he wanted to sort of have his body already in that sort of pre-rigor mortis state. And that was a decision he made to talk that way, especially at the end where he's in the car and the parking lot attendant won't leave him alone. Yeah. And a final note I have here is that Tarantino, it was between Lawrence Tinery and Timothy Carey for the role of Joe in Reservoir Dogs, that Tarantino, but he just kind of said Timothy Carey was just a nut. He was just a little too much.
I think he died and then it was dedicated to him or something.
Yeah, so I wrote down he passed away in 94.
94.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but just what a character. He was the one character, I say this is the best way for me to say this, I don't want to say felt out of place, but felt more modern. Like this is somebody you would see in a more modern film is my take on him.
No, it's really true. When I think about that, the scene, I almost want to use it for, like, say, Maison en Place or some shit like that. But it definitely felt different. That scene, his ranch with the little hot rod there, it felt like suddenly I was like, what? This looks like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill or something, you know? Definitely has a different, early 60s vibe, not a late 50s vibe. That's very true.
That was definitely what I picked up on that. Can we talk a little bit about the non-linear storytelling and how sort of revolutionary that was for this film? For again, if you're still listening and you haven't watched the movie, please stop, watch the film, hit pause. We're not going anywhere. We'll be here when you come back. But that was a bold decision to go non-linear. And obviously it speaks to Sterling Hayden's agent telling him this script is a mess. They're telling the same thing 5 times over. But it's so brilliant because we have the 5 main characters and we're going to see everything that happens in real time from their point of view. And that is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It didn't get repetitive to me. I never at any point said, oh gosh, here we go. The horses are lining up at the gate, the 7th race, 100,000. Like, none of that felt repetitive. It's like, I can't wait to see what they're going to do next.
Well, if you think about it now, can you imagine an agent reacting that way? I mean, there's entire movies devoted to the whole time loop kind of mess with linear structure. Pulp Fiction, obviously he was a fan of that. Reservoir Dogs, you're reviewing this event from different, but anyway, yeah, obviously it Rashomon, the idea that preceded it. I mean, there was already a movie about Rashomon where the same event was depicted from different characters' point of view. That was 1950. And Rififi, the French heist movie, also preceded it and also did a sort of dissection of this complicated heist where everyone sort of played their role. But, I mean, it seems like it's a very common trope, like movies like Memento or Inception. It seems like that's sort of taking the idea to the next, to the modern level.
I will say this. You just invoked a quick memory when we're talking about nonlinear filmmaking. Obviously, you mentioned 2 of Nolan's films, Inception and Memento. And I remember seeing Inception in 2010 when it came out and my brain hurting. I was like, oh, I've had to think way too much. We're going 3 layers deep. And then Interstellar, which was fantastic. But the ending, the third act of that film is very like, what are we doing? Okay. So finally it's announced that Dunkirk is coming out. And Dunkirk is going to be Nolan's World War II opus about an event that happened in the early stages of World War II. And I said, okay, I am ready for just Nolan to show me a really compelling World War II story. I'm really interested in seeing this. But he had to go non-linear on that one and tell 3 stories, 1 hour, 1 week, 1 day. I remember going, what are we doing here? By the way, for the record, love Dunkirk. Phenomenal film. But he just couldn't leave it alone.
But it doesn't always work, or you have to really wield it with expertise. And as in this, and Kubrick puts on a master class here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
100%. All right. I wrote a couple other notes down here. So what I thought was interesting is when I was taking notes with the heist movie, sort of the heist formula, and I said, okay, well, this Ocean's 11 definitely, and I'm not talking about the Frank Sinatra one. I'm talking about the Soderbergh, George Clooney, Brad Pitt. When the film was over, because I wrote Ocean's 11 with a question mark. All right. So is Ocean's 11 paying an homage to The Killing? I asked that question halfway through the movie. And at the end of the movie, I put a big line through Ocean's 11 because what this film demonstrates is when you look at Ocean's 11, everything is so meticulously planned and they nail it. It's perfection and they get away with it. And that's a happy movie and everybody's great. But with The Killing, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And that's fate. And that is What
Yeah,
this movie?
that's exactly it.
Yeah, this movie.
Exactly the difference.
Yeah.
They don't get away with it. Johnny, you want to believe this guy? Look at all the assurances. Everyone thinks that he's going to fix their life. Well, not entirely. The assassin, well, he might get charged with shooting horses out of season, Johnny tells him. And he's like, you make it sound so easy. And then the wrestler who's got to start the fight, he's got to do 60 days in jail, but he's going to get a large sum of money. Everyone else, well, they don't come out so good. So they all trust him. We all trust him. And it's really, there are no winners.
It just made me realize, okay, I love Hollywood. I love a good, fun movie. Obviously, I've been doing podcasts about movies for the past 12 years, so I love a good heist movie. But what I love about this film, is, anyone that watches a heist movie from The Town to Wrath of Man, Snatch, Sneakers, any of these movies, they always sort of come out on the end, and it makes you believe that you could get away with that. Me and my buddies, I think we could plan the perfect crime. And then I tell everybody now, well, watch The Killing, because it's going to show you that's like, I'll ask you this, Dave. I wrote down, could anyone actually pull this off? Could anybody pull off robbing the aqueduct in New York? Could anyone do that? No.
It's certainly not, because it seems like they were using analog tools in the analog age. And so they needed someone to literally toss the money out a window, and they needed someone to carry it, and they needed to stuff into a suitcase. Everything's all digital, and money is, it's not all physically in cash anymore. So yeah, a racetrack heist movie would be totally different now. But I would say, when I'm thinking about movies just in general, I think it whetted maybe not initially, but I think that the value of a really good heist movie became known. It has certain elements that people like. And so look how, the Italian Job, the original Italian Job was like in England, that's with Noel Coward. It's a hugely popular, like perennial favorite. Sexy Beast kind of updated the heist movie, right?
I'm putting that on the list. I haven't seen that. Hold on. Sexy Beast. Okay.
Sexy Beast absolutely was like that. We had a hard guy leading this sort of, and then we have the trope of the retired thief lured in for one last job, and which is really, it's a good one too. But I think any of those sort of jobs, Kubrick did it so damn well that you could easily base your new spin on this genre, with a large dose of The Killing.
Yeah. There was one movie that I wrote down that, with everything going wrong, it reminded me of a 1975 movie called Dog Day Afternoon, which unfortunately is based on a true story, so it can't be inspired by The Killing. But this sort of movie sort of reminded me, that's a quasi heist movie / bank robbery, but it goes terribly wrong for all involved.
In the 70s versus early 70s as opposed to the 50s. Different problems, different,
And of course, I also wrote down heist movies gone wrong, where the heist goes wrong. Obviously, 1988's Die Hard. Things didn't work out well for Hans Gruber. He had the perfect plan, and his.
That's right. But there you go. See, that's what I was thinking. What I love about Johnny Clay, Sterling Hayden's Johnny Clay, is the smart criminal.
Yeah.
Criminals were usually, outlandish Bond villains, or, just undone by the hero or whatever. And here you've got a guy who is sort of an anti-hero. He's a criminal. He's a career criminal. But you're totally rooting for him to pull this off. You're gonna like, oh no, the racetrack shouldn't lose its money. You want them to have, all these people to have better lives somehow.
Yeah, and that's the thing you touched on. Charismatic protagonist / antagonist all rolled into one. And Sterling Hayden's Johnny Clay is that character. And that's what makes a great heist movie, is when you want to spend time with these guys, even though in real life you'd want nothing to do with them. You wouldn't invite them in for a beer. You wouldn't communicate with them. But And it's what makes The Sopranos such a brilliant show, is because we all love Tony Soprano, even though he's a murderer, he's a killer, but we want to spend time with these guys.
Right. And do you really want to hang out with Ralphie Cifaretto?
No.
I know. And yet, kind of, yeah. It's a weird one. One thing I wanted to talk about that, I think I've seen this movie maybe 15, 20 times.
Wow.
Possibly over the years. But the thing that I didn't really get at first, the character named Marvin Unger, he's one of the first people we see when the heist when we first come in at 3:45, and then it's all sort of pre-incident. He's an older man. He's drunk. He's stumbling into the scene. Everyone's looking at him uneasily. So what happens earlier is that he's been sort of providing the money and the shelter for Johnny Clay. And what comes out is that he's in love with Johnny Clay. He is in love with Johnny Clay. So what you realize is why he's there. The reason he's there is because he's in a drunken stupor. Why is he in a drunken stupor? Well, earlier that morning, there's a scene between them where Johnny's saying, all right, well, because it's the day of the heist. So Johnny sits, and they're very close, physically close. Their faces are close. And he's going, Marv, this is the last time I'll see you. You've always been a stand-up guy in my book. And then Marv says, hey, wait a minute. Hey, maybe when this is all done, I know you're getting married, but maybe you're rushing into that. He says, why don't we give the world a couple of spins? Get away and just let the world spin a few times. And Sterling gives him a look. He pushes him back into the bed. He goes, you need to go back to sleep. And the look in Marvin's face is pure rejection. He's saying, I want to get away with you. It's sort of presented almost avuncularly, but it's pretty clear what the thing is. And then so he's drunk because he's hurt. That's why he was told, stay where you are. Don't come to the track. Comes to the track anyway.
Comes to the track.
So that's the one thing that goes off until things go off. That's the one hitch because of that. And it's such an interesting complication, and it's really, really easy to miss. And he snuck it in there so expertly.
Brilliant. I mean, absolutely brilliant. Okay, so a couple things here. I picked up on a James Cameron paying homage to The Killing when Johnny is smuggling when they're smuggling the shotgun in the box of roses. The flower box. When in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, 1991, you have Arnold smuggling a shotgun through the mall in a box of flowers. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's because Guns N' Roses, did a song for Terminator 2, and that's kind of but I say, no, James Cameron's way too smart. That is a nod to The Killing. So I wrote down Terminator 2 box of, shotgun and a box of flowers.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice, ironic symbol, isn't it? Yeah. A beautiful flower box concealing a, instrument of death.
The other thing I wrote down here is the subtle foreshadowing is throughout here, but I finally I knew something was going to go wrong when he buys a suitcase from a secondhand store. It's clearly a secondhand store. Yeah. And if you look in the background, you can see a banner where it's a bar saying Lenny Bruce performing tonight. Wow,
well spotted.
Yeah.
I've seen it 20 times, and now I'm up to 20. And I never saw that.
You'll see that when he walks out. I only picked that up on the second viewing when I was taking notes. The foreshadowing was obviously, why would he buy a secondhand suitcase? That was the question that was getting me. Yeah. And then when he puts the money in and he can't lock the one side of it, I said, okay. My gut's telling me, because I've seen so many successful heist movies, that he's going to get away with this. But then watching it now going, oh, no. All the pieces are in play to show that this is going to collapse on him.
I think at this point, it's starting to unravel because things are starting to go wrong at that point. I forget the exact detail, but the reason he has to get the suitcase is something he was delayed or something. This was basically veering from the script. Getting that suitcase was not in the plan. And he suddenly looked sloppy and desperate. He's trying to shove that money in there. And it's like there's a line he says, something like, I went and got the biggest suitcase I could find. Well, that's greed talking. You should get, I mean, I know it's petty, but you get a good suitcase, make sure it's going to hold the money, if it doesn't. So suddenly he's having to improvise. Everything that he thought of worked out pretty damn well. And he thought of everything.
But, it's interesting because he says, you're right, because he says, I went and bought the biggest suitcase he could find. More foreshadowing. Because when he goes to the airport and they won't let him carry it on, when he asks to speak to the supervisor, he goes, well, well, we would let you bring 2 smaller bags. You could each have 2 smaller bags, but just one that big, we can't do that. And again, it's from what I recall, the reason he was delayed is because of the chaos at the track caused the traffic to delay him. Caused traffic to delay him by up to 15 minutes, and everything just, like you said, perfectly falls apart. But
Sterling Hayden, Johnny's trying to convince the assassin to take the job. He says he's explaining what he'll do, and he says Red Lightning will be leading in the stretch because that's the way he runs, and I love that. Because he's thought about every last detail, and that shows you. And that's how you predict a horse race. You know that a certain horse likes to lead the pack at first, and it was such a little detail, but the details are there. Between the racing details, there's a great bit where after the shooting occurs, where you hear the track announcer say that the jockey was unharmed, which was sort of kind of a little bit of black humor thrown in there when, this catastrophe has just happened. There's also a moment that I say is the same thing when our crooked cop, Randy, is about to do his job, and suddenly a woman runs out of a building and says, help me, he's beating her to death. Puts the car in gear, no change of expression, drives away. She's just so black and cold, and the tone was so Kubrickian.
And then we get to, so everybody has their role, and it's fascinating because it's one of these, again, going back to the Ocean's 11 thing. In Ocean's 11, you think they've given you enough to understand exactly what they're going to do. But then the audience gets kind of the switcheroo when you realize that they had other plans that they didn't make us aware of. With the killing, we know what everybody's role is. And it's fascinating to see it all implemented. And I love how it just sort of takes the time to say, this is your job, this is your job, this is your job. So when Marvin shows up, I remember saying, what was his role again? I think I missed what he was supposed to be doing.
He was the money guy.
He was the money guy. Yeah.
He was basically the money guy. And yeah.
You answered that for me. That was a big question I had for this particular episode. Was I don't remember exactly what Marvin's role in this, because he shows up drunk.
I wish I could do more for you. And he has another line where he goes, there's nothing I wouldn't do for you, Johnny. I mean, there's a couple of little slightly suggestive lines, and it's funny because and then the thing that sort of, so everything, once you have this sort of sense of Marvin, you can see that. When we first meet Johnny, he and Faye have their little quickie sex or whatever, just as they start to snuggle a little bit again, Marvin bursts through the door.
Yep.
Total cock block.
Yep.
And it's just like the scene, the intimacy is done. He never touches her for the rest of the movie. I just found Kubrick was really having fun with that. I would like to add that another one of my favorite characters is the wrestler who starts the fight, a guy named Nicholas Nestor, known as Cola Quariani. He wrestled under the name Nick the Wrestler. In this movie, he's a character named Maurice, a chess-playing wrestler, which he was. He was a chess-playing wrestler. He spent his time at this chess center in New York, and so he's hired by Johnny Clay to because, as Johnny puts it, he's someone who won't squawk when the going gets rough.
Yeah.
And he's got a shaven head. He's burly as hell. He's got a cauliflower ear. Yeah. And he does this job, and it turns out that he actually died when he was attacked by 5 assailants at the chess club that he frequented.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't even make this stuff up. February 1980, while entering the chess and checker club, he was seriously injured after being assaulted by a group of teenagers, says Wikipedia. Crazy, and he died afterwards. And as someone says, he probably could have taken 2 or 3 of them, but 5 was too many.
And he was, in 1980, he would have been up there in years, yeah.
Yeah, he was born in 1903. He died at 77, and he's still, you got to believe, put up a good fight.
Yeah.
So, incredible presence on screen. They all were. Everyone, I thought of Nora Desmond. Back then, we had faces. In this movie, everyone's face is just so good and true. I love it.
And Maurice, the wrestler, he had some of the most philosophical lines of all the characters, which I'll admit, required me to turn the subtitles on because I have a little challenge with his dialect.
Me too. It was not entirely clear. Subtitles are a good idea, but he still, Kubrick met him. I think he met his producer playing chess. So Kubrick was a true chess player. So there was such an authenticity about so much of this that just ran through it. And his love of noir movies, he assembled this cast of, Marie Windsor, who plays Sherry Peedy, queen of the B movies. She was, I love reading about her. She was so tall for 5'10", was huge back then, that she finally, when she co-starred with Forrest Tucker, she finally had a man she could look up to. But they usually had to bend over.
But it's perfect casting when the way she looks down at George. I guess in closing, I want to ask, obviously, for the cinephiles out there, for the people that follow film religiously, we're not selling any. We're not selling. You guys, you're sold. You've already seen this, and we're just talking about a film that's beloved. But for those who haven't seen this film, or for those that maybe haven't watched it in a while, we are talking about a movie that is almost 70 years old. It's up there in years, and how do we sell this to the younger ones out there? I wonder how the younger generation or is it a futile effort?
And I think you just have to say it really slaps.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I'm sorry. I said that to my girlfriend the other day. I said, "Oh, that slaps." And she's like, "What did you just say?" I say, "I know. Okay. You're 47 years old.
You and I can say it, buddy."
Yeah, we can get away with it.
All right.
All right. Well, David, that was great. That was a good conversation. Thank you so much.
What are we going to do next?
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have a conversation off air. So you'll just have to tune in to see what we're going to come up with next. But David, again, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your book, The Plus One, which is your memoir, and there's a link in this episode's show notes, and I encourage everyone to listen to our first conversation. It's only a few episodes back, so you're going to go a little more in depth about that book. But thanks for being on the show. Thanks for recommending this movie. It was great.
This was so fun. I'm totally primed to do it again.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Until next time, my name is DanaBuckler, and thank you so much for listening.